She was about to sign away her marriage to the most dangerous man in Manhattan until two words stopped his empire cold. "I'm pregnant." Adrian DeLuca doesn't lose. He doesn't beg. He doesn't break. But when his wife reveals she's carrying his child in a boardroom filled with lawyers and armed guards, the divorce papers are torn in half and the real war begins. This isn't a story about escape. It's about whether a monster can transform into a father, and whether the woman who knows all his sins can ever trust him again. Watch until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The boardroom occupied the 47th floor of the DeLuca Financial Tower, a gleaming monument to legitimate wealth built on a foundation of blood money. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan like a god surveying his kingdom, the afternoon sun casting harsh shadows across the polished mahogany table that stretched between two people who had once promised forever. Adrian DeLuca sat at one end, his posture relaxed in a way that fooled absolutely no one. He wore a charcoal suit tailored to perfection, his dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on Roman coins, all hard angles and aristocratic bones. But it was his eyes that told the real story. Ice gray and utterly empty of warmth, they had witnessed horrors that would shatter ordinary men and emerged only colder for it. At the opposite end sat Lillian Hart, soon to be Hart again, once she signed the documents waiting before her. She had dressed carefully for this moment, choosing a cream blouse and navy slacks that said professional, controlled, finished. Her auburn hair was pulled into a neat chignon. Her hands, clasped on the table, didn't shake. She had practiced for this, rehearsed her composure until it became armor. 5 years of marriage condensed into a stack of legal documents. Between them sat 4 lawyers, 2 notaries, and the suffocating weight of everything left unsaid. Along the walls, 6 security guards stood at parade rest, their presence a reminder that Adrian DeLuca never went anywhere without protection. Or was it that no one was ever allowed to leave without permission? Lillian had learned the difference the hard way. James Corrigan, Adrian's lead attorney, cleared his throat. He was a thin man with silver hair and the moral flexibility that came from 30 years of representing New York's elite criminals. "Shall we proceed with the final signatures?" Adrian didn't respond. He simply lifted the Mont Blanc pen, a wedding gift from Lillian back when she still believed in symbols, and signed his name across the bottom of page 43 with a flourish that somehow managed to look both elegant and dismissive. The sound of expensive ink on expensive paper seemed obscenely loud. He set the pen down precisely in the center of the table, equidistant between them. The gesture said everything: your turn, your choice, your freedom. Except they both knew freedom was an illusion in Adrian DeLuca's world. Lillian's attorney, Margaret Chen, was the best divorce lawyer in Manhattan and had needed 3 meetings just to convince Lillian this was possible. "Mrs. DeLuca?" Her voice was gentle, encouraging. "Whenever you're ready." Lillian reached for the pen. Her fingers closed around the warm metal. She could feel Adrian's gaze on her face, studying her with that unnerving intensity he'd never quite managed to turn off, even now, even at the end. She positioned the pen over the signature line. She had imagined this moment for 2 years, dreamed it during sleepless nights in their palatial bedroom while Adrian worked in his study, conducting business she'd learned never to ask about, planned it during elegant dinner parties where she smiled at dangerous men and their diamond-draped wives, playing the role of the perfect consort to New York's most feared power broker. The pen touched paper. "There's something you should know." The words left her mouth before she could stop them, before wisdom or fear or 5 years of learned silence could intervene. The room froze. Adrian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those winter eyes. Recognition, perhaps, that the game had shifted. "Counselors," he said quietly, never looking away from Lillian, "leave us." "Mr. DeLuca, I really must advise," Corrigan began. "Out." The single word carried enough menace to move mountains. The lawyers gathered their briefcases with practiced efficiency. Margaret shot Lillian a concerned glance, silently asking if she was safe, if this was okay. Lillian managed the smallest nod. Margaret didn't look convinced, but she left anyway, followed by the notaries and their rolling cases of official stamps. The security guards remained. "Them too," Lillian said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. Adrian considered her for a long moment, then gestured with 2 fingers. The guards filed out like shadows, closing the heavy doors behind them with a soft click that sounded like a cell locking. And then they were alone, 47 floors above the city, surrounded by glass and steel and the empire Adrian had built through methods Lillian had spent 5 years trying not to fully comprehend. They faced each other across the wreckage of their marriage. Talk, Adrian said. Such a simple word, such a complicated command. Lillian set the pen down carefully, buying herself seconds to arrange thoughts that had been chaotic for weeks now. Do you remember our anniversary dinner 3 months ago? The Bordeaux you didn't drink. His memory was photographic, especially regarding her. It had felt romantic once. Now it felt like surveillance. You said you had a headache. I lied. I know. Of course he knew. Adrian DeLuca built his empire on reading people, on detecting the smallest inconsistencies in their stories. You've been lying about a lot of things lately. The morning sickness you blamed on bad seafood. The doctor's appointments you claimed were for stress. The way you've been avoiding wine, coffee, anything that might... I'm pregnant. The words landed between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Adrian went absolutely still. It was the stillness of a predator that had just detected prey. Every sense suddenly focused, calibrated, locked on target. Say that again? I'm 10 weeks pregnant. Lillian's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, still flat beneath the silk of her blouse. I found out 6 weeks ago. The silence stretched. Outside the windows, the city continued its oblivious dance. Yellow cabs threading through traffic, pedestrians hurrying along Fifth Avenue, the world turning as it always did, unaware that something fundamental had just shifted in the DeLuca universe. You've known for 6 weeks. Adrian's voice was eerily calm, the kind of calm that preceded violence. And you said nothing. I didn't know what to say. The truth would have been a start. He rose from his chair with liquid grace, moving to the windows with his hands clasped behind his back. Against the bright afternoon sky, he looked like a silhouette cut from darkness itself. When were you planning to tell me? After the divorce was final, or were you just going to disappear and raise my child in secret? I haven't decided. He turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd dropped her revelation, she saw genuine emotion crack through his legendary control. Rage, yes, but underneath it, something else. Something that looked almost like fear. You haven't decided. He repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. That's not how this works, Lillian. Actually, that's exactly how this works. She stood as well, tired of craning her neck to look up at him, tired of always being at a physical disadvantage. My body, my choice, my decision. Our child. A child you don't even know if you want. A child that's mine. The possessiveness in his voice was absolute, final. Did you really think I would just let you walk away with my blood, my legacy, my... He stopped himself, jaw clenching. You must think I'm a monster. I know you're a monster, Adrian. I've known for 4 years, 11 months, and 6 days. The precise number surprised even her. Apparently she'd been counting. Ever since the night I woke up at 3 a.m. and found you in the study, washing blood off your hands. The memory hung between them. He'd told her it was nothing, an accident with broken glass. She'd pretended to believe him because believing felt safer than knowing. And yet you stayed, he said softly. For 5 years, you shared my bed, my home, my name. You hosted my associates, attended my functions, played the devoted wife to perfection. If I'm a monster, Lillian, what does that make you? The question hit its mark. She'd asked herself the same thing 1,000 times during sleepless nights, during elegant dinners where she smiled at men who'd ordered deaths like other people ordered wine, during quiet moments when Adrian looked at her with something almost like love, and she wondered if she was seeing the man or the mask. It makes me a coward, she answered. Someone who convinced herself that luxury was worth the price of her soul. Someone who told herself that the man she fell in love with was real, even when all evidence suggested otherwise. He was real. Adrian moved away from the windows, closing the distance between them with measured steps. He is real. The man who brought you coffee in bed every Sunday. Who learned to cook pasta from scratch because you mentioned loving it once. who sat with you through your father's funeral and held you while you cried. That man exists, Lillian. He's just not the only one. That's the problem. She held her ground even as he approached, refusing to retreat. I can't live with only part of you. I can't share my life with a man who's gentle with me, but ruthless with everyone else. I can't raise a child in a world where armed guards are normal, and I'm never sure if you're coming home or I always came home. Until the night you don't, her voice cracked. Until the enemies you've made decide to take what you took from them. Until some rival decides the best way to hurt Adrian DeLuca is through his family. I've lived in that fear for 5 years. I won't let my child live in it. He stood before her now, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jawline from a knife fight when he was 19, close enough to smell his cologne, something expensive and understated, like everything about his carefully constructed public persona. Then what do you want? The question was raw, stripped of artifice. Name it, anything, everything. Just tell me what it takes to keep you here. I want you to walk away from it all. The empire, the business, the whole criminal operation that you've dressed up in legitimate corporate structures. I want you to choose us over power. You're asking me to dismantle everything my father built, everything I've spent 20 years maintaining and expanding. I'm asking you to be a father instead of a kingpin. Those aren't mutually exclusive. They are in any world worth living in. She held his gaze, refusing to look away. Your child deserves better than growing up as the heir to a criminal empire. Better than learning that power comes from fear and violence is just business. Better than becoming you. The words were cruel, and she knew it. But cruelty was sometimes the only language Adrian truly understood. He flinched as if she'd struck him. For a moment, just a heartbeat, his legendary control shattered completely, and she saw the wound beneath. Then the mask reformed, smooth as glass. Is that what you think? That I'd corrupt our child the way my father corrupted me? I think you'd love them. I think you'd give them everything money can buy. And I think they'd grow up knowing their father was feared, knowing that fear was power, knowing that the empire they inherited was built on broken bones and destroyed lives. She paused. Yes, Adrian, that's exactly what I think. He turned away, moving back to the windows, his reflection ghostly in the glass. My father was a brutal man, vicious. He ran his empire through terror and taught me that mercy was weakness. By the time I was 16, I'd seen him kill 3 men with his bare hands for the crime of disrespect. Lillian had heard fragments of this before, late-night confessions whispered in the dark when Adrian's defenses were lowered by wine and intimacy. But never the full story. Never like this, in the harsh daylight of dissolution. He brought me into the business young, too young. Made me watch interrogations, participate in collections, prove myself worthy of the DeLuca name. Adrian's voice was distant, mechanical, reciting facts instead of memories. When I was 19, he gave me a gun and a name and told me to handle a problem. A rival who'd been encroaching on our territory. I killed my first man that night. Threw up for an hour afterward. My father laughed and told me it got easier. Did it? Yes. The single word hung in the air like an admission of damnation. By the time he died and I inherited his empire, killing had become just another business decision. Mercy became strategy. Violence became tool instead of crime. I told myself I was better than him because I chose negotiation over brutality when possible, because I built legitimate businesses alongside the illegal ones, because I valued loyalty more than fear. He turned to face her again, and his eyes held something she'd rarely seen, genuine vulnerability. But you're right. I'm still my father's son, still running his empire, still using his methods when necessary, still believing that power is the only real security in a world designed to destroy the weak. He paused. And I can't promise to be different. I can't promise to walk away from everything I am, everything I've built, just because you ask me to. Even for your child? I don't know how. The confession seemed to cost him something. This world, this life, it's all I know. It's who I am. You're asking me to cut out my own heart and somehow keep breathing. I'm asking you to choose, Lillian said quietly. The empire or your family, power or love, the life you've always known or the possibility of something better. And if I choose wrong, If I walk away and we're killed by enemies who smell weakness? If I dismantle my protection and someone takes revenge for old sins? How is that better for our child? At least they'd grow up with a father who tried to be good instead of one who perfected being terrible. The words landed like judgment. Adrian's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Couldn't argue, perhaps, because they both knew she was right. The afternoon sun had shifted, painting the boardroom in shades of amber and shadow. Somewhere in the building below, their lawyers were probably speculating, calculating, preparing for whatever came next. But up here, in this glass-walled cage of their own making, there was only truth. "I need proof," Adrian said finally. "Not because I don't believe you, because I need to see it, to know it's real." Lillian reached into her purse and withdrew a folded piece of paper. Medical stationery, official, and undeniable. She handed it to him without comment. Adrian unfolded it with careful precision, his eyes scanning the printed lines. Confirmation of pregnancy. 10 weeks gestation, estimated due date, doctor's signature and official stamp at the bottom. The paper trembled slightly in his hands, the only outward sign of whatever storm raged inside him. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. Not crying. Adrian DeLuca didn't cry, but wet nonetheless, as if tears were gathering behind walls of iron will, waiting for permission to fall. "Real," he whispered. "Real," she confirmed. He moved to the conference table and picked up the divorce papers, 43 pages of legal dissolution, and without ceremony or hesitation, tore them precisely in half. Then in half again. Then again, until they were confetti floating to the expensive carpet like snow. "What are you doing?" Lillian demanded. "What I should have done the moment you said you wanted to leave." He faced her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Fighting for my family. Whatever that takes. However long it takes. You think I'm a monster? Maybe. But I'm a monster who loves you, who has loved you since you spilled coffee on me in that bookstore 5 years ago, and apologized with such genuine horror that I knew I'd found something rare. Love isn't enough, Adrian. No, but it's a start." He closed the distance between them again, this time stopping just out of reach, respecting the boundaries she'd drawn. "I can't promise to be perfect. Can't promise to walk away from everything overnight, but I can promise to try. To change. To build something better for our child. For us. Promises are just words. Then I'll show you." There was steel in his voice now, the iron determination that had built an empire. "Every day, every choice, every moment. I'll prove that Adrian DeLuca can be more than his father's son. That the man you fell in love with isn't a lie or a mask, but something real that got buried under years of violence and survival." Lillian wanted to believe him. Some part of her, the part that still remembered Sunday morning coffee and learned Italian cooking and hands holding hers through grief, desperately wanted to believe him. But belief required more than words. It required evidence. Action. Transformation. "You'll come back to the estate," Adrian continued, "not as a prisoner, as my wife, my partner, the mother of my child. The doors will be unlocked. You'll have your own car, your own accounts, your own freedom. You want to leave? Leave. You want to visit friends, family, anywhere? Go. No guards following you, no tracking your phone, no surveillance. You're offering me freedom while keeping me in the cage." She shook her head. "That's not how this works. I'm offering you choice. Real choice. Stay because you want to, not because I'm forcing you. And if you choose to leave," he paused, the words clearly costing him, "I won't stop you. I'll set up support, protection, everything you need. I'll be a father to our child even if I'm not your husband. But I'm asking for a chance to show you I can change. That's all. Just a chance." Lillian studied his face, searching for the lie, the manipulation, the hidden angle. Adrian DeLuca always had an angle, always operated 3 moves ahead, but all she saw was raw, desperate sincerity. "If I stay, and I'm not saying I will, things have to change. Fundamentally, not just window dressing and false promises. Name the terms. I meet with my attorney weekly. She checks in, confirms I'm here by choice, documents everything. If I ever want to leave, you let me go. No threats, no intimidation, no using our child as leverage. Agreed. You start transitioning away from the illegal operations. I don't care how long it takes or how complex it is. but I want to see active, measurable progress, not talk. Results. He hesitated. That one clearly cut deeper. That could take years. The empire isn't something you can just shut down overnight. There are obligations, partnerships, people who depend. I don't care about your obligations to criminals. I care about our child growing up in a world where their father isn't constantly at risk of prison or death. 6 months, he countered. Give me 6 months to start the transition, to identify what can be legitimized, what can be sold, what has to be carefully dismantled. 6 months to prove I'm serious. And in those 6 months, no violence, no deaths, no business as usual while pretending to change. I can't control what others do, but you can control how you respond. Choose negotiation over violence, money over murder, walking away over retaliation. That's asking me to show weakness to very dangerous people. That's asking you to be strong enough to choose a different path. She held his gaze. You said you wanted to prove the man I fell in love with was real. That man wouldn't kill to protect his ego. He'd find another way. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, clearly calculating risks, considering options, running through scenarios in that strategic mind that had kept him alive and powerful in the most dangerous circles in New York. 6 months, he finally agreed. I'll do everything possible to avoid violence, to transition operations, to show you I can build something legitimate. But if it comes down to protecting you, protecting our child, protecting our family, I won't hesitate. I can't promise to be harmless, Lillian, only to choose harm as a last resort instead of a first option. It wasn't everything she wanted, not even close, but it was more than she'd expected, more than she'd thought possible. And therapy, she added, for both of us, together and separately. If we're going to make this work, we need help, professional help. You want me to tell a stranger about... He stopped himself. Fine, but it has to be someone with appropriate discretion, someone who understands the unique circumstances. Someone who won't be intimidated by you, you mean? That too. Despite everything, she almost smiled. I have someone in mind, Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She works with high-profile clients, maintains strict confidentiality, and has a reputation for not taking any bullshit from powerful men. Sounds terrifying. When do we start? As soon as I make the appointment. She paused. I'm not moving back into the master bedroom? Not yet. Maybe not for a while. I need my own space, my own room where I can think and breathe and not feel like I'm being consumed by your world. The guest suite on the east wing. It has good light, a sitting area, its own entrance to the gardens. It's yours. He didn't even hesitate. Decorate it however you want. Change everything. Make it a space that feels safe. No cameras. No audio surveillance. No monitoring of any kind. Done. And I want regular prenatal checkups with my choice of doctor. You can come if I invite you, but this is my medical care, my body, my decisions. I'd like to be there, if you'll let me, not to control or monitor, just to be part of it, to see our child growing, to be present. His voice softened. Please. The please did something to her carefully maintained defenses. Adrian DeLuca didn't say please, didn't beg or ask or show vulnerability. The fact that he was doing it now, for this, meant something. We'll see, she said, unwilling to commit, but not closing the door entirely. One appointment at a time. Fair enough. They stood in the amber light of late afternoon, two people who had loved each other enough to promise forever and hated each other enough to nearly destroy it all, negotiating the fragile possibility of a second chance. I should go, Lillian said, though she wasn't entirely sure where. The penthouse apartment she'd secretly rented 3 months ago? Back to the estate that was both prison and palace? Somewhere else entirely? Come home with me, Adrian said. Not to the master bedroom, not to resume what we had. Just home. To start figuring out what comes next. We can have dinner, talk more, start making plans for... He gestured vaguely at her still flat stomach. For everything. No guards in the car. Just Marco. He's driven you for 3 years, and he's there for security, not surveillance. But if you'd rather drive yourself, Marco's fine. She'd always liked the older driver, one of the few people in Adrian's organization who treated her like a person instead of valuable property. Adrian pulled out his phone and sent a quick text. He'll bring the car around. We can leave through the private elevator. Avoid the lawyers and their questions. They'll have questions anyway. Let them question. We'll figure out what to tell them later." He paused, then added with the ghost of his old charm, "After all, we just dramatically tore up our divorce papers. Apparently we're staying married. That's going to require some explanation." "Apparently," she echoed. But as they gathered their things and prepared to leave the boardroom where their marriage had almost ended, Lillian couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much longer, much more complicated battle. Adrian DeLuca had agreed to change, had promised transformation and redemption and a better future for their unborn child. But promises were easy in glass towers overlooking the city. The real test would come in the days and weeks and months ahead, when old habits called and dangerous enemies tested, and the empire he'd built demanded the ruthlessness that had always come so naturally. Could a monster truly transform, or would he just learn to hide his teeth better? Lillian placed her hand over her stomach, over the tiny life growing inside her, and made her own silent promise. She would give Adrian his chance. 6 months to prove himself. 6 months to show that love could be stronger than legacy, that family could matter more than empire, that the man she'd fallen for in a bookstore 5 years ago was real enough to fight for. But she would also stay vigilant, stay smart, stay ready to protect her child from anyone and anything that threatened their future, even if that threat came from the child's own father. They rode the private elevator down in silence, the numbers descending as smoothly as their carefully negotiated truce felt fragile. When they reached the underground garage, Marco was waiting beside the midnight blue sedan, his weathered face professionally neutral. "Mrs. DeLuca," he greeted her with a small nod. "It's good to see you." "You too, Marco." Adrian held the door for her. A small courtesy, a gesture from their old life when such things had meant romance instead of ritual. She slid into the leather interior, and he joined her, maintaining respectful distance. As the car pulled out into Manhattan traffic, heading toward the estate in Westchester that had been her gilded cage, Lillian watched the city slide past the tinted windows. Somewhere in this vast concrete jungle, her attorney was probably having a panic attack over the abruptly canceled divorce. Somewhere, Adrian's associates were conducting business that would horrify decent people. Somewhere, enemies were plotting and allies were scheming, and the whole dangerous machinery of his empire continued its relentless turning. But inside this car, in this moment, there was just a man and a woman who had broken each other and were now trying to figure out if broken things could ever be made whole. Adrian's hand rested on the seat between them, close enough to touch but not touching. An offering, an invitation, a question. Lillian looked at that hand, strong and scarred and capable of both tenderness and terrible violence, and made a choice. She took it, not squeezing, not clinging, just holding, allowing the connection, testing the possibility. His fingers closed around hers gently, and for the first time in months, maybe years, the touch felt honest instead of performative. Neither of them spoke. Words had been exhausted in that boardroom, every truth laid bare, every bargain struck. So they simply held hands while Manhattan transformed into suburbs, while the sun sank lower toward the horizon, while the distance between who they'd been and who they might become stretched out before them like an unexplored country. The estate appeared through the trees, 20 acres of manicured perfection, a stone mansion that looked transplanted from the Italian countryside, security fencing disguised as ornamental iron, home and prison, sanctuary and cage. But as the car rolled through the gates and up the circular drive, Lillian noticed something different. The guards at the gate had waved them through instead of checking identification. The security patrol she usually saw circling the grounds was absent. The cameras that typically tracked every angle seemed to have been repositioned away from the private areas. "You've already started," she said quietly. "I told you I would." Adrian's thumb traced a small circle on the back of her hand. "The guard rotation has been reduced by half. The cameras in the house have been disabled. The trackers I had on your phone, your car, your jewelry, all deactivated as of an hour ago. The staff has been instructed that you are free to come and go as you please, no questions asked, no reports filed." "You did all that while we were driving here?" "I did most of it while you were in the bathroom before signing the papers, just in case. He offered a small, self-deprecating smile. I was never going to let you go, Lillian, but I could at least make sure that if you stayed, it was by choice. The car stopped at the main entrance. Marco came around to open her door, but Adrian was already out, offering his hand to help her from the car. She didn't need the help, but she took his hand anyway. Together, they walked into the house that would either become their home or the beautiful prison they'd finally escape. And in her womb, still too small to feel, their daughter, the tiny life that had stopped a divorce and started a war, continued her quiet growing, unaware of the complicated world she would soon enter, unaware that her very existence had become the catalyst for transformation or tragedy, unaware that everything, absolutely everything, was about to change. The East Wing guest suite was exactly as Adrian had described, flooded with natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the gardens, decorated in soft creams and pale blues that felt nothing like the dramatic blacks and golds of the master bedroom. It had its own sitting area with a small fireplace, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub, and most importantly, a door that locked from the inside. Lillian stood at the window watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and amber, while behind her, two members of the household staff unpacked the belongings she'd been keeping in a storage unit across town. Everything she'd secretly moved out over the past 3 months, preparing for her escape. Now it was all coming back, filling the guest suite with fragments of the life she'd almost reclaimed. "That's everything, Mrs. DeLuca," Maria, the head housekeeper, said softly. The older woman had been with the DeLuca family for 15 years and possessed the unique ability to be helpful without being intrusive. "Would you like me to arrange anything differently?" "No, this is perfect, thank you, Maria." "Mr. DeLuca asked me to tell you that dinner will be ready at 7, but if you'd prefer to eat in your room, I can bring a tray." The offer was kindness itself, but Lillian heard the real question underneath. "Are you okay? Do you need protection? Do you want to avoid him?" "I'll come down for dinner," Lillian said. "Thank you." After Maria left, Lillian sank into the upholstered chair by the window and let exhaustion wash over her. The day had been a marathon of emotional warfare, preparing to end her marriage, revealing her pregnancy, negotiating terms for a second chance she wasn't even sure she wanted. Her body ached with the weight of it all. She placed both hands over her stomach, still flat, but already changing in ways only she could feel. Morning sickness that came in waves. Exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. Heightened senses that made certain smells unbearable and turned her previously ironclad stomach into a delicate instrument. "I hope I'm doing the right thing," she whispered to the tiny life inside her. "I hope he really can change. Because if he can't, we're going to have to leave, and that's going to break all three of us." A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Adrian entered carrying a tray with tea, crackers, and what looked like ginger cookies. He'd changed from his business suit into dark slacks and a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. It was the most casual she'd seen him in months. "Maria mentioned you might need something to settle your stomach before dinner," he said, setting the tray on the small table beside her chair. "Ginger tea and plain crackers. I looked up what helps with morning sickness." The gesture was so unexpectedly thoughtful that Lillian felt her carefully maintained defenses crack slightly. "Thank you." "Can I sit?" She gestured to the chair opposite hers. He settled into it with the controlled grace that characterized all his movements, a reminder that Adrian DeLuca had been trained from childhood to never show weakness, never relax completely, never let his guard down. "I've been making calls," he said. "Started the process." "What process?" "Dismantling the empire." He said it matter-of-factly, as if he were discussing selling a car instead of tearing down 2 decades of criminal enterprise. "Called a meeting with my top lieutenants for tomorrow morning. Going to start identifying which operations can be legitimized, which can be sold to trusted parties, and which need to be shut down entirely." Lillian sipped the ginger tea, letting the warmth soothe her uneasy stomach. "That fast? You gave me 6 months to show progress. I'm not wasting time." He paused, his gray eyes studying her face. "I also scheduled our first appointment with Dr. Mitchell. Thursday at 2 o'clock, if that works for you." "You called a therapist who specializes in not taking bullshit from powerful men and made an appointment for couples counseling within 6 hours of agreeing to it?" "I told you I was serious." She wanted to find fault in his efficiency, some hidden manipulation in how quickly he was checking boxes on her list of demands. But all she could see was a man trying desperately to prove himself, moving heaven and earth, because the alternative was losing everything. "What did you tell your lieutenants?" she asked. "About the sudden change in direction?" "The truth. That I'm going to be a father, and I want my child to inherit something better than blood money and enemies." He leaned forward slightly. They weren't happy, especially Castellano. "He's been with me since the beginning, helped me consolidate power after my father died. This feels like betrayal to him." "Is it dangerous? His being unhappy?" "Potentially. But Castellano is loyal to the De Luca name above all else. Once he understands this is about protecting the next generation, he'll fall in line." Adrian's expression darkened. "It's the others I'm worried about. The partners and associates who have built their own operations under the De Luca umbrella. They're going to see this as weakness, as opportunity. To do what? To take what they think I'm abandoning, to test boundaries, to see if Adrian De Luca has gone soft." He met her eyes. "Which is why I need you to understand that the next 6 months are going to be dangerous. Not because I'm choosing violence, but because others might see my restraint as invitation." Lillian's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "You're saying that trying to change puts us in more danger than staying the same would have?" "In the short term, yes. In the long term, if I can successfully transition to legitimate operations, we'll be safer than we've ever been. But there's going to be a period where I'm vulnerable, where we're vulnerable." He reached across the space between them, not quite touching, but close. "I will do everything in my power to protect you, both of you. I just need you to trust me." Trust. Such a small word for such an enormous ask. "I'm trying," she said honestly. "But trust isn't rebuilt in a day, Adrian, especially when you've spent years proving I couldn't trust you." "I know." He withdrew his hand, accepting the rejection with more grace than she'd expected. "Which is why I'm going to prove it through action instead of words. Starting with this." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and handed it to her. Inside were documents. Legal papers transferring ownership of multiple properties into her name exclusively. Bank accounts with staggering balances, access codes to safety deposit boxes, stock portfolios worth millions. "What is this?" she asked, though she could read the legalese clearly enough. "Insurance, independence, proof that you're not trapped." Adrian's voice was steady, but his eyes revealed something deeper, fear that this gesture might not be enough. "Everything there is yours. Your name only. No joint ownership, no access for me without your explicit permission. If you decide tomorrow or next month or 5 years from now that you want to leave, you'll have the resources to build whatever life you want." Lillian stared at the documents, at the evidence of wealth that represented true freedom. Adrian De Luca was handing her the keys to his kingdom, or at least a significant portion of it, with no strings attached. "This is tens of millions of dollars," she whispered. "Closer to 70, actually, and it's the cleanest money I have. Nothing in those accounts came from the operations we're shutting down. Legitimate investments, inheritance from my mother's family, profits from the legal businesses. It's yours." "Why?" "Because you asked me to prove I'm serious about change, because you need to know you have choices, and because—" He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his usually controlled features. "Because I love you, not the way my father loved my mother, as property, as proof of status, as something to be controlled. I love you the way you deserve, which means giving you the power to leave me." The words hit her harder than expected. All day she'd been braced for manipulation, for the version of Adrian who played chess with people's lives and always stayed 3 moves ahead. But this felt genuine, raw, the kind of honesty that cost something. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep them. Use them however you want. Invest them, spend them, lock them away and forget about them. Just know they're there. Know you're not trapped." She folded the documents carefully and set them on the table beside her tea. "Thank you." "You're welcome." He stood, recognizing the dismissal in her tone. "I'll let you rest before dinner. If you need anything—" "Adrian?" She stopped him at the door. "This doesn't fix everything. Money doesn't erase the past 5 years or guarantee the future. I know. But it's a start. A real start." Something in his expression softened, hope breaking through the careful control. "That's all I'm asking for. A chance to start over. To do it right this time." After he left, Lillian sat in the fading light and tried to process everything that had happened since she'd walked into that boardroom prepared to end her marriage. The pregnancy revelation, the torn divorce papers, the negotiated terms of their second chance, and now this, evidence that Adrian was willing to give up control, to hand her the power to destroy him financially if she chose. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a precipice, unsure whether the next step would be flight or fall. Dinner was served in the smaller dining room, the one they'd used early in their marriage when it was just the two of them, and elaborate dinner parties weren't yet routine. Maria had prepared something simple: grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, pasta with olive oil and herbs. Nothing too rich or heavily spiced, carefully chosen for a queasy stomach. Adrian was already seated when Lillian arrived, a single glass of red wine at his place. He looked up as she entered and immediately pushed the wine away. "I wasn't thinking," he said. "I'll have water instead." "You don't have to stop drinking just because I can't." "I want to." He gestured for Maria to remove the wine glass. "We're in this together. Seems only fair we share the sacrifices." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the clink of silverware against china the only sound. It felt almost normal, almost like the early days when they were still discovering each other, before the weight of his world had crushed the lightness between them. "I've been thinking about names," Adrian said suddenly. Lillian looked up, surprised. "We don't even know if it's a boy or girl yet." "I know, but I've been thinking anyway." He set down his fork. "If it's a girl, I'd like to name her after my mother, Sophia. She died when I was 8, before my father turned me into what I became. She was kind, gentle, everything good that I'm not." The vulnerability in his voice was startling. Adrian rarely spoke about his mother, keeping that grief locked away in the same vault where he kept all his other human emotions. "Sophia is beautiful," Lillian said softly. "Tell me about her." She loved gardens, spent every spare moment with her hands in the soil, growing roses and lavender and herbs. The gardens here, he gestured toward the windows, toward the elaborate landscaping that Lillian had always assumed was for show. "I maintained them exactly as she designed them. They're the only part of this estate my father never controlled." "I didn't know that." "There's a lot you don't know about me. A lot I've never told you because I learned young that sharing weakness invites attack." He picked up his water glass, staring into it as if seeing the past reflected in the crystal. "My mother used to sing to me Italian lullabies from her childhood in Tuscany. She'd sit on the edge of my bed and stroke my hair and promise that everything would be all right, even when my father was raging downstairs about some business matter gone wrong." "What happened to her?" "Cancer, swift and brutal. 6 months from diagnosis to death." His jaw clenched. "My father wouldn't let her go to the hospital in those final weeks. Said it showed weakness, would make competitors think the DeLuca family was vulnerable. So she died in her bedroom upstairs, in pain, with only me and the nurse my father hired to keep her quiet." "Adrian." Lillian reached across the table without thinking, covering his hand with hers. "I was 8 years old, watching my mother die by inches because my father valued image over mercy. That's when I learned what power really meant in his world. That's when whatever softness I had started to calcify into something harder." He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with hers. "I don't want that for our child. Don't want them to learn that love is weakness and kindness is liability. If we have a daughter, I want her to grow up knowing her grandmother would have adored her, that somewhere in our bloodline there was gentleness." Lillian felt tears prick her eyes. This was the man she'd fallen in love with, the one who revealed himself in fragments, in unexpected moments of honesty that cut through the armor he wore like skin. "And if it's a boy?" she asked. "I haven't gotten that far yet. Every name I think of is tainted by association with my father's empire. Men who proved loyalty through violence, associates who taught me that mercy was weakness." He paused. "Maybe you should choose. Pick something clean, something not connected to this world." "We'll choose together," Lillian said firmly, "when the time comes, one decision at a time." They finished dinner talking about safer topics, the renovations she might want for the guest suite, the garden produce that would be ready for harvest soon, books they'd both been meaning to read. It felt almost domestic, almost normal, as if they were any couple expecting their first child instead of a crime boss and his estranged wife negotiating détente. After dinner, Adrian walked her back to the East Wing, maintaining careful distance in the hallway. "There's something else," he said when they reached her door. "I've scheduled a full security assessment for tomorrow. Not to increase surveillance, but to identify vulnerabilities. If I'm reducing the guard rotation and opening up your freedom of movement, I need to make sure the perimeter is actually secure. More cameras? Better ones. Focused on exterior threats, not interior monitoring. You won't be tracked inside the house or on the grounds, but anyone trying to get in will be identified immediately." He paused. "I know you want less security, not smarter security, but I'm trying to balance your freedom with actual safety. This is my compromise." It was reasonable, logical, the kind of protective measure any wealthy family might take, stripped of the paranoid surveillance Adrian had previously employed. "Okay," Lillian agreed, "as long as there's nothing in my private spaces." "You have my word." "And the staff, Maria, Marco, the others, they report to you, not about me?" "I've already had that conversation. They're here to help the household run smoothly, not to monitor your movements or report your activities. Anyone who can't accept those terms will be reassigned elsewhere." His voice took on an edge. "I meant what I said, Lillian. You're not a prisoner. Not anymore." She believed him. Against her better judgment, despite 5 years of evidence to the contrary, she believed he meant every word. "Good night, Adrian." "Good night." He started to leave, then turned back. "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying, for giving me this chance, for not signing those papers." His gray eyes held hers. "I know you think I tore them up to trap you, but I tore them up because losing you would have destroyed me. Losing both of you." He shook his head. "I wouldn't have survived that." Before she could respond, he was gone, walking back toward the main wing with that controlled grace that never quite hid the predator underneath. Lillian entered her suite and locked the door behind her, not because she feared Adrian would enter uninvited, but because she needed the psychological barrier, the symbol of autonomy. She drew a bath in the clawfoot tub, adding lavender oil that Maria had thoughtfully stocked in the bathroom. As she sank into the hot water, feeling her tense muscles begin to relax, she let herself think about everything that had changed in the span of a single day. This morning, she'd have been hours away from freedom. Tonight, she was back in Adrian's home, wearing his ring, carrying his child, and somehow negotiating a future that felt both terrifying and cautiously hopeful. The next 6 months would tell the story. Whether Adrian could truly dismantle his empire, whether he could choose family over power, whether the man who'd held her captive through fear and control could transform into someone worthy of her trust, and whether she could forgive him for the 5 years he'd stolen, the freedom he'd denied, the woman she'd been before he'd shaped her into something smaller. The water cooled around her as she processed it all. Finally, exhausted beyond measure, she climbed out and wrapped herself in the plush robe hanging on the bathroom door. In bed, in the darkness of her new private space, Lillian placed both hands over her stomach and made a promise to the tiny life growing there. "I'll protect you," she whispered, "from everyone and everything, even from your father if I have to. But I'm going to give him a chance to prove he can be more than what his father made him, because you deserve to know if the good parts of him are real." Sleep came slowly, and when it did, her dreams were filled with roses and lavender, Italian lullabies sung by a gentle woman she'd never met, and the ghost of the man Adrian might have been if his mother had lived and his father had loved him differently. The next morning brought the sharp reality of Adrian's world crashing back. Lillian was in the sunroom having breakfast, more ginger tea and plain toast, the only things her stomach would tolerate, when she heard raised voices from Adrian's study, male voices, angry and overlapping, the kind of argument that preceded either resolution or violence. Maria appeared at her elbow, face carefully neutral. "Mr. DeLuca asked me to inform you that he has a business meeting this morning. He apologizes for the noise." "Who's here?" "Mr. Castellano and several other associates. They're discussing the transition Mr. DeLuca announced last night." Through the windows, Lillian could see 3 black SUVs parked in the circular drive. Security clearly hadn't been reduced for this meeting. Whatever was happening in that study required muscle. Is it dangerous? She asked Maria, who'd been with the family long enough to know when to worry. Mr. Castellano is old school, loyal but traditional. He doesn't like change. Maria refilled her tea with steady hands. But he respects Mr. DeLuca. It will work out. The certainty in her voice was reassuring, but Lillian couldn't shake the anxiety. This was the first real test of Adrian's promise. Men who'd built their fortunes on his empire were now being told that empire was dismantling. How much resistance would he face? And more importantly, how would he respond to that resistance? She'd asked him to choose negotiation over violence, money over murder. But what happened when the men in that study refused to be negotiated with? An hour later, the voices had quieted, but not silenced. Lillian tried to focus on the book she'd been reading, a novel about a woman rebuilding her life after divorce, but the irony was too sharp and her concentration too scattered. When Adrian finally emerged from his study, he looked exhausted. Not physically, his suit was still impeccable, his posture still perfect, but emotionally, as if he'd been fighting a battle that left no visible wounds but cost him nonetheless. He found her in the sunroom and sank into the chair across from her without invitation. "How bad?" she asked. "Castellano wants to retire. Says if I'm abandoning what we built, he's done watching it happen." Adrian's voice was flat. "The others are split. Half think I'm right to legitimize before law enforcement or rivals catch up to us. Half think I'm showing weakness that will get us all killed. And you?" "I think they're both right, and I think I don't have a choice." He looked at her directly. "I made you a promise. I'm keeping it, even if it costs me everything I've built." "What happens to Castellano?" "I'm setting him up with enough money to disappear to wherever he wants to go. He's earned that much for 20 years of loyalty. The others who want out will get the same offer. Clean break, generous severance, no hard feelings." "And the ones who want to stay?" "They adapt or find new employment elsewhere." His jaw set. "This is my empire, my choice. They can follow my lead or get out of the way, but they don't get to dictate terms." It was the most decisive she'd seen him since the boardroom, and part of her responded to that strength, but another part worried about the fallout. Will Castellano really just retire quietly? Castellano is a lot of things, but he's not suicidal. He knows that if he moves against me, it ends badly for everyone. Adrian leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. "He's just disappointed. He thought I'd be different from my father, but in the same direction, more ruthless, more powerful, more untouchable. Instead, I'm choosing to be different by stepping away entirely. That's not the legacy he wanted to be part of. But it's the legacy our child deserves." "Yes." He opened his eyes and looked at her with something like wonder. "How did you get so brave? Most people in your position would have just signed the papers and run. But you stayed and demanded I change. That takes either courage or insanity." "Probably both," Lillian admitted. "I keep questioning whether I'm doing the right thing, whether giving you this chance is wisdom or weakness. Time will tell." He stood, rolling tension from his shoulders. "I have more calls to make, more operations to untangle. But I wanted you to know the meeting got heated, but it never got violent. I kept my promise. Thank you for telling me." He started to leave, then paused. "There's a prenatal appointment tomorrow at 10. Your obstetrician called to schedule it while you were having breakfast. I wasn't sure if you wanted me there or if—" "You can come," Lillian interrupted. "If you want to." The relief on his face was immediate and genuine. "I want to." After he left, Lillian sat in the sunroom watching the gardens his mother had designed, thinking about legacy and transformation, about the distance between who we are and who we might become. Adrian DeLuca was trying to change, taking real steps, making hard choices, burning bridges with men who'd helped him build his empire. It wasn't redemption, not yet, maybe not ever completely, but it was progress. And for now, in this moment, progress was enough. The baby growing inside her deserved a father who tried, who fought against his nature and his upbringing to become something better. Whether he succeeded or failed was still unknown, but at least he was trying. And maybe, just maybe, that was how transformation actually happened. Not in dramatic moments of revelation, but in the daily choice to be different, one decision at a time, one promise kept at a time, one small victory over the darkness that had shaped him. Outside, the roses his mother had loved were beginning to bloom, red and white and pink against the green of late spring. Inside, a woman who'd almost walked away was learning to hope again, cautiously, carefully, one heartbeat at a time. The obstetrician's office occupied the top floor of a medical building in Upper Manhattan, all cream walls and soft lighting designed to soothe anxious parents-to-be. Lillian sat in the waiting room with Adrian beside her, watching him pretend to read a magazine about pregnancy nutrition while his leg bounced with barely contained nervous energy. "You don't have to be anxious," she said quietly. "It's just an ultrasound." "I'm not anxious." The lie was immediate and unconvincing. "Your leg has been shaking for 10 minutes. He stilled the motion instantly, that iron control reasserting itself. I faced down armed rivals and federal prosecutors without breaking a sweat. A medical appointment shouldn't rattle me. This is different. This is real. She reached over and took his hand, surprising them both. It's okay to be nervous about seeing your child for the first time. His fingers tightened around hers. What if something's wrong? What if the stress of everything, the divorce proceedings, the arguments, all of it, what if it hurt the baby? The vulnerability in his voice cracked something open in her chest. This was Adrian completely stripped of armor, revealing the terrified man underneath the crime boss facade. Dr. Patel is excellent. She'll tell us if there are any concerns. Lillian squeezed his hand. But I feel fine. Tired and nauseous, but that's normal. Everything is probably perfectly healthy. Probably isn't certainty. Nothing about parenthood is certain. You're going to have to get used to that. Before he could respond, a nurse called her name. They followed her down a hallway lined with photos of babies, tangible proof of successful outcomes, tiny faces that represented hope. Dr. Patel was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an efficient manner that Lillian had appreciated from their first meeting 3 months ago. She greeted them warmly, showed no reaction to Adrian's presence or the security guard who'd stationed himself discreetly in the hallway outside, and got straight to business. How are you feeling, Lillian? Any concerns since we last spoke? Just the usual, morning sickness, fatigue, nothing alarming. Good. And you must be the father. Dr. Patel extended her hand to Adrian, who shook it with careful courtesy. Adrian DeLuca, thank you for seeing us on short notice. Of course. First pregnancies deserve close monitoring. She gestured to the examination table. Lillian, if you'll get comfortable, we'll take a look at this baby. Lillian settled onto the table while Adrian stood awkwardly to the side, clearly unsure of his role in this clinical space. Dr. Patel dimmed the lights and prepared the ultrasound equipment with practiced efficiency. This will be cold, she warned, applying gel to Lillian's exposed stomach. The moment the transducer touched her skin, the monitor flickered to life with grainy black and white images that looked like abstract art. Dr. Patel moved the wand carefully, studying the screen with focused attention. There, she said, pointing to a small shape that looked like a bean with a rapid flutter inside it. Your baby. And there's the heartbeat. The sound filled the room, a quick, strong rhythm like horses galloping, impossibly fast and absolutely perfect. Adrian made a noise somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Lillian looked over to find him staring at the monitor with an expression of such profound wonder that she barely recognized him. Tears tracked down his face unchecked, and he made no attempt to hide them or wipe them away. That's our baby? His voice was wrecked, barely a whisper. That's your baby, Dr. Patel confirmed, measuring right on schedule for 10 weeks. Heart rate is strong and steady at 168 beats per minute. Everything looks exactly as it should. Can you tell the gender yet? Lillian asked, even though she already knew the answer. Not at this stage, but around 20 weeks we'll be able to see if you want to know. Dr. Patel took measurements, capturing images for the record. You're due in early December, right around the holidays. December. A winter baby. Lillian tried to imagine herself 8 months pregnant, waddling through the estate with snow falling outside. Tried to picture Adrian as a father holding a newborn, being responsible for something infinitely more precious than his empire. The images were both terrifying and strangely hopeful. Dr. Patel printed out several ultrasound photos and handed them over. These are yours to keep. I'll see you again in 4 weeks unless you have any concerns before then. Keep taking your prenatal vitamins, stay hydrated, and rest when your body tells you to rest. Thank you, Lillian managed. Adrian couldn't seem to speak at all. He just stood there, holding the ultrasound photos like they were sacred texts, staring at the grainy images of their child. Back in the car, he still hadn't let go of the photos. Marco drove them through Manhattan traffic while Adrian sat in silence, occasionally looking down at the images in his hands.
"Are you okay?" Lillian finally asked. "I didn't think it would feel like this." His voice was rough with emotion. "I knew academically that you were pregnant, that we were having a child, but seeing it, hearing the heartbeat, it became real in a way I wasn't prepared for. Welcome to parenthood. Nothing prepares you." "I've killed people, Lillian." The confession came out stark and brutal. "I've ordered deaths, sanctioned violence, done things that would horrify any decent person. And now I'm going to be responsible for this tiny, innocent life. How is that fair? How can someone like me deserve—" "Stop," she cut him off firmly. "You're not that person anymore, or you're trying not to be. That's what matters. Not who you were, but who you're choosing to become. What if I can't be different? What if all this effort to change is just performance, and underneath I'm still my father's son? Then you'll have failed. And our child will grow up knowing their father tried and couldn't quite get there." She looked at him directly. "But at least you'll have tried. That's more than your father ever did." He absorbed that in silence, then carefully tucked the ultrasound photos into his jacket pocket, close to his heart. When they arrived back at the estate, Castellano's car was parked in the drive. The older man stood on the front steps, hands in his pockets, face grave. "I asked him to come by," Adrian said quietly to Lillian. "There are things we need to settle." "Do you want privacy?" "No, stay. You should hear this." They found Castellano in the study, the same room where he'd argued against Adrian's plans just 2 days earlier. He looked older somehow, the weight of 20 years in this life suddenly visible in the lines around his eyes. "You wanted to see me?" Adrian's tone was neutral, careful. "I wanted to apologize." Castellano's voice carried the rasp of too many cigars and too much whiskey. "I said things the other day that were out of line. Disrespectful. You're making a choice for your family, and I should have supported that instead of making it harder." Adrian gestured for him to sit, then settled into the chair behind his desk. Lillian took the seat by the window, a silent observer to this negotiation between old allies. "You weren't wrong to be concerned," Adrian said. "This is a radical shift. It affects everyone who's built their operations under our umbrella." "But it's the right shift." Castellano leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I went home and thought about it. About my own kids, my grandchildren. What kind of legacy am I leaving them? Money earned from fear and violence? The knowledge that their grandfather was a criminal who happened to get away with it? You did what you had to do to survive. So did your father. Doesn't make it right." Castellano's eyes drifted to Lillian, then back to Adrian. "You got a chance to do better, to give your kid something clean. That's rare in our world. Probably unique. You'd be a fool not to take it." "I thought you wanted me to be more like my father. I wanted you to be strong like your father, decisive. But I never wanted you to be cruel like him, to value power over people." He paused. "Your mother would be proud of what you're doing. She always hated this life, hated what it did to you." Something shifted in Adrian's expression at the mention of his mother. "You knew her?" "Before she married your father, yeah. We grew up in the same neighborhood in Brooklyn. She was going to be a teacher, did you know that? Had a scholarship to Columbia and everything. Then she met Dominic DeLuca at a party, and that was the end of those dreams." Lillian watched Adrian absorb this information about a mother he'd barely known, piecing together fragments of a life stolen by circumstance and choices made too young. "She never told me that," he said quietly. "She probably didn't want you to know how much she'd given up. Didn't want you to feel guilty for being the one good thing that came from her marriage." Castellano's expression softened. "But she loved you fiercely, Adrian. Every decision she made after you were born was about protecting you from your father's world. She failed in the end, couldn't protect you forever, but not for lack of trying." The silence that followed was heavy with grief and regret, with the weight of lives shaped by violence and choices made in desperation. "I'm setting you up with $5 million, Adrian said finally. "Clean money, enough to retire anywhere you want, live comfortably, take care of your family." "That's too much." It's exactly right. 20 years of loyalty deserves more than a handshake and a bus ticket. Adrian's tone brooked no argument. You've earned it. Take it. Disappear somewhere warm. Watch your grandkids grow up. Die of old age instead of bullets. Castellano's eyes grew wet. You're a good man, Adrian. Better than you think you are. I'm trying to be. After Castellano left, Adrian sat at his desk in silence, staring at nothing.
Lillian moved to stand behind him, placing her hands on his shoulders. That was kind. What you did for him? It was practical. Generosity ensures loyalty even in departure. He won't cause problems if he's financially secure. It was also kind, she insisted. You can acknowledge good impulses without undermining them with strategy. His hand came up to cover hers on his shoulder. I don't know how to do that. How to separate the man from the calculation. It's all become so tangled.
Then we'll untangle it, one choice at a time. She squeezed his shoulder gently. You have therapy tomorrow. Dr. Mitchell at 2 o'clock. That's a start. I'm not good at therapy, talking about feelings with strangers. Good thing Dr. Mitchell specializes in difficult men then. Despite everything, he almost smiled. That night, Lillian was reading in her suite when a soft knock interrupted her concentration. She opened the door to find Adrian holding a small wrapped box. I got you something, he said, looking almost shy. For the baby, technically, but I thought you should have it first. Inside the box was a silver locket on a delicate chain. When she opened it, one side held a tiny copy of that day's ultrasound photo. The other side was empty, waiting. The other side is for a photo of the baby after they're born, Adrian explained, so you can carry both versions, the promise and the reality. Lillian's throat tightened with emotion. This is beautiful. Can I put it on you? She nodded, turning so he could fasten the clasp. His fingers were gentle against her neck, careful not to catch her hair. When she turned back, he was standing close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for letting me be part of today, for letting me see our baby, hear the heartbeat. I know I don't deserve... She stopped him with a finger to his lips. Stop saying you don't deserve things. Start proving you do deserve them. That's how this works. He kissed her finger gently, then stepped back, respecting the boundary she'd drawn. Good night, Lillian. Good night. After he left, she touched the locket resting against her collarbone, feeling the slight weight of it. The tangible proof of Adrian's capacity for tenderness. Maybe transformation was possible. Maybe people really could change if they wanted it badly enough. If the stakes were high enough. If love was strong enough to combat all the darkness they'd learned. Or maybe she was being naive. Maybe Adrian was just performing change, going through the motions while his fundamental nature remained unchanged. Time would tell. The next 6 months would reveal the truth. But tonight, wearing a locket that held her baby's first photograph, Lillian chose to hope. The next afternoon, they sat in Dr. Mitchell's office, a space designed to feel more like a living room than a clinical setting. Comfortable chairs instead of a couch, artwork on the walls, soft lighting that didn't feel harsh or judgmental. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was younger than Lillian expected, maybe 40, with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. She had a reputation for working with powerful clients, for maintaining absolute discretion while refusing to be intimidated. Thank you both for coming, she began, settling into her chair with a notepad. Let's start with what brought you here. Adrian and Lillian exchanged glances. Where to even begin? We almost got divorced, Lillian said bluntly. Had the papers ready to sign. Then I told him I was pregnant and everything changed. Changed how? He tore up the divorce papers, asked me to stay, promised to transform his entire life to be the father our child deserves. Dr. Mitchell turned to Adrian. And you? How would you describe what changed? I realize that power means nothing if you lose everything that matters. His voice was measured, careful. I've built an empire on fear and control, but fear and control don't make a family. They make a prison. I want something different for my child, for us. What kind of empire are we talking about? The kind that operates outside legal boundaries, Adrian answered without hesitation. Criminal enterprises hidden behind legitimate businesses. I've spent 20 years building it, and the last 2 weeks beginning to dismantle it. To her credit, Dr. Mitchell's expression didn't change.
And Lillian, you stayed because you believe he can change? I stayed because he deserves the chance to try, and because our child deserves to know if their father can be more than what he was raised to become. Lillian's hands twisted in her lap. But I'm terrified I'm being naive, that I'm putting myself and my baby at risk by trusting him. Trust has to be earned, Dr. Mitchell said, especially when it's been broken. Adrian, help me understand what you're asking Lillian to trust. I'm asking her to trust that I can choose love over power, family over empire, that I can break the cycle my father started and become someone worthy of being a husband and father. He paused. I'm asking her to trust that the man she fell in love with is real, not just a mask I wore to trap her. Was it a mask? No. The answer was immediate. The man who brought her coffee and learned to cook pasta and sat with her through her father's funeral. That was real. But so was the man who ran a criminal empire and controlled her movements and turned love into possession. Both existed. Both exist. I'm trying to kill one and strengthen the other. You can't kill parts of yourself, Dr. Mitchell said gently. But you can choose which parts to feed, which impulses to follow, which version of yourself to become. They spent the next hour excavating the foundation of their relationship, how they'd met in a bookstore 5 years ago, when Lillian was working part-time while finishing her master's degree, and Adrian was shopping for a first edition for a client. How their courtship had been swift and intense, a whirlwind of romance that swept them both into marriage within 6 months. When did you first suspect his business wasn't legitimate? Dr. Mitchell asked Lillian. About a year into the marriage. There were too many late-night meetings, too many associates who carried themselves like soldiers, too many conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Lillian's voice was distant, remembering. Then one night I woke up to use the bathroom and found him in his study washing blood off his hands. He said he'd broken a glass. I knew he was lying, but I was too afraid to push. Afraid of what? Of confirming what I suspected, of having to make a choice I wasn't ready to make, of losing the life I'd built, the version of him I loved. She looked at Adrian. It was easier to pretend everything was fine than to face the truth. And when did the truth become undeniable? When the security increased, when guards started following me, when he put trackers on my phone and car and I realized I wasn't his wife anymore. I was his possession. Adrian flinched but didn't argue. Tell me about that decision, Dr. Mitchell said to him. When did you decide to monitor her? When rivals started making threats. When I realized that being married to me had painted a target on her back. His jaw clenched. I told myself it was protection, that the surveillance was necessary to keep her safe. But somewhere along the way, protection became control. I stopped seeing her as a partner and started seeing her as a liability that needed to be managed. How did that feel, Lillian? Being managed? Like dying by inches. Like watching myself disappear into being Mrs. Adrian DeLuca instead of Lillian Hart, who had her own dreams and identity. Tears threatened, but she held them back. I went from being a person to being a role. The perfect wife, the elegant hostess, the woman who smiled at criminals and never asked questions. Is that when you decided to leave? That's when I started planning to leave. Actually, deciding took another year. Finding the courage took even longer. She looked at Dr. Mitchell. I know it sounds weak. I had resources, education, family I could have gone to. But leaving someone like Adrian isn't just walking out the door. It's warfare. And I needed to be strategic. You needed to survive, Dr. Mitchell corrected. There's no weakness in that. They scheduled another session for the following week and left with homework, individual journals documenting their feelings, their fears, their hopes for what their family could become. In the car heading home, Adrian was quiet for a long time before speaking. She's good, direct, doesn't let me hide behind justifications. That's why I chose her. But Lillian stared out the window at the city passing by. Do you think this can work? Therapy and good intentions and promises to change? I think if we don't try, we'll definitely fail. If we do try, there's at least a chance. He reached across the seat, offering his hand. I'm willing to take that chance. She took his hand, lacing her fingers with his. So am I. That evening, sitting in her suite with her journal open, Lillian tried to articulate the tangle of emotions fighting for dominance. Fear that she was being foolish, hope that change was possible, Love for the man Adrian could be warring with anger at the man he'd been. And underneath it all, fierce protectiveness for the tiny life growing inside her, the innocent child who would either be blessed with a transformed father or cursed with a monster in disguise. She wrote late into the night, filling pages with honesty she hadn't allowed herself in years. When she finally set the pen down, her hand was cramping and her eyes were tired, but her heart felt lighter. Across the estate, Adrian sat in his study with his own journal, staring at the blank page for over an hour before finally writing 2 sentences that felt like ripping open his chest. I am terrified of failing them. I am even more terrified of succeeding and discovering I don't know how to be the man they need. Outside, the gardens bloomed in the darkness. Roses his mother had planted 2 decades ago, continuing their cycle of growth and renewal, living proof that beauty could survive in soil stained by violence. And inside the estate, 2 broken people were learning that redemption didn't come in dramatic moments, but in small daily choices, in showing up even when terrified, in choosing love even when power was easier. The road ahead was long and uncertain. The past was heavy with sins that couldn't be erased. But for the first time in 5 years, the future held possibility instead of just dread. And that fragile, tentative possibility was enough to keep them both fighting for something better. One day at a time. One choice at a time, one small victory over the darkness at a time. The baby growing between them didn't know about empires or crimes or complicated histories, didn't know about the violence that had funded the estate or the fear that had defined their marriage. All that tiny heart knew was the steady rhythm of its own beating, the promise of life, the possibility of becoming. And maybe that was the lesson they both needed to learn, that becoming was always possible no matter how dark the past. That transformation was a choice, renewed every day, in every moment, with every decision. That love, real love, wasn't possession or control. It was setting someone free and hoping they chose to stay anyway. 3 months passed in a rhythm of cautious progress and unexpected setbacks, of therapy sessions that excavated old wounds and quiet evenings where they learned to be in each other's presence without the weight of their history crushing every moment. Lillian's body changed in ways both beautiful and uncomfortable. By 20 weeks, her belly had rounded into an unmistakable curve, and the baby had started making its presence known through gentle flutters that gradually intensified into actual kicks. She was standing in the nursery, a room Adrian had begun preparing without asking, instinctively knowing she'd want it close to her suite, when she felt the strongest movement yet. "Oh!" she gasped, hand flying to her stomach. Adrian looked up from the crib he was assembling, immediately alert. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. The baby just kicked. Really kicked." She pressed her hand more firmly against the spot. "Here, feel this." He crossed the room in 3 strides, hesitating just before touching her. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." His hand settled on her belly, large and warm through the thin fabric of her shirt. They stood there for a long moment, waiting. Then it happened again, a distinct thump against his palm. Adrian's eyes went wide. "That's real. That's actually our baby, very much alive and apparently practicing for a soccer career." She smiled despite herself at the wonder on his face. "It's stronger than I expected." "She's strong." The pronoun slipped out before Lillian could stop it. Adrian's gaze snapped to hers. "She, you know? We have the 20-week ultrasound tomorrow. Dr. Patel said she'd tell us the gender if we wanted to know." Lillian placed her hand over his, both of them feeling their daughter move beneath their palms. "I've been having dreams. Always a girl. Always with dark hair like yours." "Sophia," he whispered. "If it's a girl, can we name her Sophia?" "After your mother?" "Yes." The answer felt right, felt like honoring something good that had been lost too soon. Sophia de Luca. They stood together in the half-finished nursery, connected by the life moving between them, and for a moment the past didn't matter. Only this present, this possibility, this tiny person who would either be raised by parents who'd learned to love each other again, or by 2 people who'd tried and failed but at least had given everything to the attempt. The next morning brought the anatomy scan, a detailed ultrasound that would confirm everything was developing normally and reveal whether Lillian's dreams had been prophetic or just wishful thinking. Dr. Patel took measurements with practiced efficiency, checking the heart chambers, counting fingers and toes, examining the spine and brain, and all the intricate systems that had to align perfectly for a healthy baby. Adrian held Lillian's hand through it all, squeezing gently whenever Dr. Patel paused to document something. "Everything looks perfect," the doctor finally announced. "Heart is strong. Measurements are right on target, all organs developing beautifully. You have a very healthy baby." "And the gender?" Lillian asked. Dr. Patel angled the screen so they could see more clearly. "Right there. See? You're having a daughter." Lillian looked at Adrian to find tears streaming down his face again, just like the first ultrasound. But this time he didn't try to hide them or wipe them away. He just let them fall while staring at the image of his daughter on the screen. "A girl," he said, voice breaking. "We're having a girl." "Sophia," Lillian confirmed. "Sophia Elena DeLuca." He added his mother's middle name without asking, and Lillian nodded her approval. "Sophia Elena DeLuca, who will grow up knowing she was wanted, loved, protected, who will never doubt her worth or fear her father or learn that violence is the answer to problems." "We'll make sure of it," Lillian promised. Dr. Patel printed out several images and handed them over. "I'll see you again in 4 weeks. Everything is progressing beautifully." In the car afterward, Adrian couldn't stop looking at the ultrasound photos. Sophia in profile, Sophia's tiny hand near her face, Sophia's perfect spine curving in a C shape. "I need to tell you something," he said as Marco navigated through traffic. "About the business. About the progress I've made." Lillian braced herself. 3 months into their 6-month agreement, she'd been deliberately avoiding asking for detailed updates, trusting that Adrian would tell her when there was something significant to report. "I've divested from 60% of the illegal operations. Sold some to trusted associates with the understanding they're on their own if law enforcement comes calling. Shut down others completely. The remaining 40% is more complicated. Partnerships with people who don't accept buyouts easily, operations that can't be transferred without drawing unwanted attention. That's substantial progress." "It is. But it's also drawn attention from exactly the kind of people I was worried about. Rivals who see weakness, partners who feel betrayed. There have been threats." He paused. "Credible threats. Against me, against the legitimate businesses, against anyone associated with the DeLuca name." Fear spiked through her. "Against us? Against the baby?" "I've tripled security around the estate, added measures you can't see, surveillance, early warning systems, arrangements with local law enforcement. Nothing will get through to you. I promise you that." "You can't promise that. No one can promise absolute safety." "Then I promise I'll die before I let anyone hurt you or Sophia." The certainty in his voice was absolute. "I know you asked me to avoid violence. I've tried. But if it comes down to protecting my family or keeping my hands clean, I choose my family every single time." Lillian understood what he was saying, understood that the transformation she'd asked for had limits, that the man who'd built an empire on ruthlessness couldn't completely erase that part of himself. "What kind of threats are we talking about?" "The Bratva, Russian organization I used to partner with. They're unhappy I sold their distribution network to a competitor. They see it as disrespect. They've made it known they expect compensation, or they'll take it in other ways." His jaw clenched. "I offered them twice what the network was worth. They refused. This isn't about money anymore. It's about sending a message." "What message?" "That Adrian DeLuca doesn't get to walk away clean. That there's a price for abandoning the life." Lillian's hand moved to her belly protectively. "What are you going to do?" "What I have to do. Meet with their leadership, negotiate a settlement they'll actually accept, make it clear that walking away from crime doesn't mean I've become weak." He looked at her directly. "I won't start violence, but I won't run from it either." "When is this meeting?" "Tomorrow night. Neutral territory, just leadership, no weapons. It's as safe as these things get." Nothing about it sounded safe, but Lillian had lived in Adrian's world long enough to know that sometimes danger was unavoidable, that choosing the lesser risk was the best anyone could hope for. "I want you to stay at the estate tomorrow," Adrian continued. "Extra security, no leaving the property, just until this is resolved." That sounds like the old control, not the new trust. "It's practical protection for one night while I handle a threat." His tone was firm but not angry. "After tomorrow, if everything goes well, the Bratva situation is resolved. and we're one step closer to being completely legitimate. I need you to work with me on this." She wanted to argue, to insist that she wouldn't be controlled even temporarily. But she was 6 months pregnant with his daughter, and the threats weren't theoretical anymore. They were real, credible, dangerous. "One night," she agreed. "But you come home, Adrian. Whatever happens in that meeting, you walk away and come home to us." "I will. Promise me." "I promise." The next evening crawled by with agonizing slowness. Lillian tried to read, to watch television, to do anything that would distract her from the fact that Adrian was in a room with men who might decide killing him was easier than negotiating with him. Maria brought dinner to her suite, stayed to chat for a while, clearly assigned to keep her company, but doing it with enough grace that it didn't feel like babysitting. Around 8, Margaret Chen called to check in. Their weekly call that had become a lifeline, proof that Lillian had options, that someone outside the estate was monitoring her well-being. "How are things really?" Margaret asked after the pleasantries were dispensed with. "Complicated. He's making real progress with legitimizing the business, but it's creating new dangers. There's a meeting tonight that has me worried." "Do you feel safe? If you need to leave, I can have a car there in 20 minutes. "I feel safe here. It's him I'm worried about." Lillian realized the truth of it as she said it. Somewhere along the way, her fear had shifted from being afraid of Adrian to being afraid for him. "He's trying so hard to change, Margaret, really trying, and I'm terrified it's going to get him killed." That would solve your divorce problem quite efficiently. Margaret's dark humor was one of the things Lillian appreciated about her. "I don't want him dead. I want him to be the man I fell in love with, the one who existed before his father destroyed all the soft parts of him." "And is he? Becoming that man?" "He's becoming something. I'm not sure what yet, but it's different from what he was." She paused. "We're having a girl." "We found out yesterday." "Congratulations. That's wonderful news. Her name is Sophia, after his mother, and I'm terrified of bringing her into this world, into his world, even though he swears it won't be his world much longer." "Fear is normal. You're about to become a mother while your husband dismantles a criminal empire and tries to avoid getting killed in the process. Anyone would be terrified." They talked for another 20 minutes before Margaret had to go. After hanging up, Lillian paced her suite, checking her phone obsessively, even though she knew Adrian wouldn't call during the meeting. 9 o'clock came and went, then 10. By 11, she was sitting by the window watching the driveway, jumping at every car sound in the distance. At 11:45, headlights finally swept up the drive. She was downstairs before she consciously decided to move, meeting Adrian at the door as he came through. He looked exhausted but unharmed, his suit still immaculate, no blood or signs of violence. "You're okay," she said, and it came out more like an accusation than relief. "I'm okay." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly despite the belly between them. "It's done. We reached an agreement. They get a percentage of the legitimate businesses for the next 5 years, then we're square. No retaliation, no further claims, clean break." "But you gave them part of your legitimate businesses?" "Small price for peace, and it's structured so their stake diminishes over time. By year 5, they're out completely and I own everything free and clear." He pulled back to look at her face. "I kept my promise. I came home. I was terrified. I know. I'm sorry." He kissed her forehead gently. "But it's over. The Bratva are satisfied, that threat is neutralized, and we're one major obstacle closer to being completely clean." They stood in the foyer holding each other while the grandfather clock chimed midnight. Somewhere in her belly, Sophia kicked against Adrian's stomach, reminding them both what they were fighting for. "Come upstairs," Lillian said quietly. "Not to the master bedroom. Just come sit with me for a while. I don't want to be alone right now." He followed her to the East Wing suite, to the sitting area where they'd had tea that first night back. She curled into one corner of the small sofa, and he took the other end, close but not crowding. "Tell me about your mother," she said. "Not the sad parts. The good memories." Adrian was quiet for a moment, reaching back through decades of grief to find joy. She had this laugh, bright and surprised, like she couldn't quite believe something was funny, but delighted by it anyway. She'd cover her mouth when she laughed, like she was embarrassed by her own joy. What made her laugh? "Silly things. I love Lucy reruns. My father attempting to cook and failing spectacularly. Me trying to pronounce Italian words and mangling them. His expression softened with memory. She loved books. Had a whole library she'd collected. First editions and signed copies and books so worn from reading that the spines were broken. She used to read to me every night, even after I got too old for bedtime stories. We'd sit in her sitting room and she'd read whatever she was currently obsessed with. Mysteries, romances, biographies of artists. She sounds wonderful. She was. And she would have loved you. He looked at Lillian directly. She would have been grateful that Sophia has a mother who fights for her, who demands better, who won't settle for a father who's only half present. I wish I could have known her. Me too. She would have told you stories about what I was like as a boy, before everything went dark. Would have shown you photos of me missing teeth and covered in mud from the gardens. Would have been thrilled about becoming a grandmother. Sophia chose that moment to kick particularly hard, visible even through Lillian's shirt. Adrian's eyes tracked the movement, wonder spreading across his face. "Can I?" he asked, gesturing to her belly. She nodded and he moved closer, placing both hands where Sophia was most active. Their daughter responded immediately, pushing against his palms like she recognized her father's touch. "She's so strong," he marveled. "Takes after you." "I hope she takes after you. Your strength is harder earned, more real." His hands spread wider, trying to feel as much of their daughter as possible. "I want her to have your courage, your ability to demand what you deserve, your refusal to accept less than your worth. And I want her to have your determination, your ability to change when change is necessary, your love of your mother's gardens and Italian lullabies and first edition books." They sat like that for a long time, both touching the place where Sophia grew, both dreaming aloud about who their daughter might become. Not a crime boss's heir, not a victim of her father's choices, just a girl, loved and protected, given every chance to become whoever she wanted to be. Eventually exhaustion won. Lillian's eyes grew heavy, her body relaxing into the cushions. "I should go," Adrian said softly. "Let you sleep." "Stay." The word came out before she could question it. "Just for tonight, just to sleep. I don't want to be alone." He looked uncertain, like he was waiting for the catch. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." They moved to the bed, Lillian on her usual side and Adrian on the other, a careful distance between them. She turned off the light, and darkness filled the room, broken only by moonlight through the windows. "Adrian," she said into the darkness, "thank you for coming home tonight, for keeping your promise. Thank you for waiting for me, for caring if I came home at all." Silence settled over them, comfortable and peaceful. Lillian was drifting toward sleep when she felt Adrian's hand find hers in the darkness, their fingers intertwining. She squeezed gently, and he squeezed back. They fell asleep like that, holding hands across the space between them, connected by touch and hope and the tiny life that had somehow become their bridge back to each other. The next morning, Lillian woke to find Adrian already gone, a note on his pillow written in his precise handwriting. "Had early meetings. Didn't want to wake you. Thank you for last night, for everything. A." She held the note for a long moment, then tucked it into the drawer of her nightstand alongside the ultrasound photos and the locket he'd given her months ago. Evidence of transformation, proof of progress, small pieces of hope accumulated over time. At her next therapy session, Dr. Mitchell asked about the shift she sensed in their dynamic. "Something's changed," the therapist observed. "You're sitting closer together today, more relaxed." Lillian glanced at Adrian, who sat beside her on the couch instead of in the separate chair he'd occupied during previous sessions. "We slept in the same bed last night, first time in almost a year. How did that feel?" "Safe," Lillian answered, which surprised me. I expected to feel anxious or trapped, but I just felt safe. "And you, Adrian? How did it feel for you? Like coming home after being in exile?" His voice was rough with emotion. "Like, maybe I haven't lost everything, after all." "You're both making remarkable progress. The work you're doing individually and together is creating real change." Dr. Mitchell set down her notepad. "But I want to address something. Adrian, you've been extremely focused on external change, dismantling the business, creating financial security for Lillian, proving through action. But are you doing the internal work, addressing the trauma that created the need for control in the first place? He shifted uncomfortably. I journal. I think about my patterns. I try to choose differently. That's a start. But have you grieved? For your mother, for your childhood, for the man you might have been if your father hadn't broken you? The question landed like a physical blow. Adrian's hands clenched, his jaw tight. Grief is a luxury. It doesn't change anything. But grief is necessary. It's how we process loss and make peace with what can't be changed. Dr. Mitchell leaned forward slightly. You're trying to transform while carrying the full weight of your past. Eventually that weight will crush you, or you'll have to set it down. I don't know how to set it down. Then let's start learning. Together, in our individual sessions, we'll begin unpacking the grief you've been carrying since you were 8 years old, watching your mother die. After the session, in the car heading home, Adrian was quiet for so long that Lillian thought he might not speak at all. She's right, he finally said, about the grief. I've never dealt with it. Just buried it under layers of anger and ambition and the need to prove I was stronger than the pain. It's not too late to deal with it now. What if opening that door destroys me? What if I start grieving and can't stop? Then I'll be there while you fall apart, and I'll help you put the pieces back together. She took his hand. That's what partners do. They hold each other through the breaking because they know breaking is sometimes necessary for healing. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. I don't deserve you. Stop saying that. Start being someone who does deserve me. That's the whole point. By the time they reached the estate, Sophia was kicking up a storm, as if she could sense her father's emotional turmoil and wanted to remind him she was there, she was real, she was reason enough to keep fighting. She's active today, Adrian observed. She's been active all week. I think she's running out of room in there. Lillian placed his hand on the spot where Sophia's foot was most definitely pushing. Feel that? That's her heel. How can you tell? Practice. I've been carrying her for 6 months. You learn to read the topography. She guided his hand to another spot. And that's probably her back. She's curled up like this. Lillian demonstrated with her other hand, showing the curve of their daughter's position. Adrian's eyes went soft watching her explain their daughter's position. You're going to be an amazing mother. We're going to be amazing parents, she corrected. Together, both of us. That's the plan. That's the plan, he agreed. And for the first time since this all began, Lillian truly believed it might actually work. Not because Adrian had magically transformed into someone perfect. Not because their past was erased or their problem solved. But because they were both choosing every day to fight for something better than what they'd had. Because grief didn't have to be the end of the story. It could be the beginning of healing. Because monsters weren't born, they were made. And if they could be made, perhaps they could be unmade too. Because Sophia deserved parents who tried, who fought, who refused to let the darkness win. And maybe, just maybe, trying was enough. Maybe love didn't conquer all. But it could be strong enough to transform willing hearts. Maybe redemption wasn't a destination, but a direction. A choice renewed every day to move toward light instead of falling back into shadow. Maybe they would fail. Maybe 6 months wouldn't be enough time. Maybe the Empire's ghosts would haunt them forever. But standing in the nursery later that evening, watching Adrian carefully paint a mural of a garden on Sophia's wall, roses and lavender just like his mother had grown, Lillian thought that maybe, just maybe, they might actually succeed. Not in being perfect, but in being real. In being present. In being people their daughter could be proud to call her parents. The mural took shape under Adrian's careful brushstrokes. Roses in pink and red and white. Lavender in purple clusters. Green vines twining around a painted arbor. My mother would have loved this, he said, stepping back to examine his work. She always said gardens were proof that beautiful things could grow anywhere if you gave them enough care and attention. Even in soil stained by violence, Lillian added softly. Especially in soil stained by violence. She said the best gardens grew from compost, from broken down, dead things transformed into something that could nurture life. It was the perfect metaphor for what they were attempting. Breaking down the dead things, the control, the fear, the criminal empire, and transforming them into something that could nurture their daughter's life. Lillian moved to stand beside him. And together they looked at the garden taking shape on Sophia's wall. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The empire wouldn't dismantle itself. Enemies wouldn't disappear. The past wouldn't be erased. But tonight, in this room that would belong to their daughter, they were building something beautiful from broken pieces. And that was enough. The mural was nearly finished when everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning in early December, 3 days before Lillian's due date. She was in the kitchen with Maria discussing final preparations for the nursery when Adrian's phone rang. She watched his expression shift from calm to cold fury in the span of seconds. "When?" he demanded into the phone. "How many? Is anyone hurt?" Lillian's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where Sophia had been unusually quiet all morning. "What's wrong?" Adrian held up one finger, listening intently. "Lock down everything. I'm on my way." He ended the call and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen in months, the ruthless calculation of a man preparing for war. "There's been an incident at the main warehouse. Someone set a fire. Tried to make it look like an accident, but the security footage shows otherwise." "Who would—" "Dmitry Volkov, the Bratva leader's nephew. Apparently their leadership's agreement doesn't extend to the younger generation. He was already moving toward his study, already shifting into the version of himself he'd been trying to leave behind. They want to send a message that the old guard is weak for letting me walk away." "What are you going to do?" He stopped, turned to face her fully. "I'm going to handle it, quietly, without violence if possible. But I need you to understand that if they're targeting my businesses, they might escalate to targeting my family." The words sent ice through her veins. "Sophia and I aren't safe here?" "You're safe. The estate security is impenetrable, but I need to deal with this today, before it becomes something worse." He closed the distance between them, cupping her face in his hands. "I promised you I'd choose family over empire. I'm keeping that promise. But sometimes protecting family means confronting the empire one last time." "Just come back," she whispered. "Whatever you have to do, just come back to us." "I will." He kissed her forehead, then her belly where Sophia rested, and was gone. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Lillian tried to rest, to read, to do anything that would quiet the anxiety gnawing at her. But every car sound made her jump, every phone notification made her heart race. Around 3 in the afternoon, a strange sensation rolled through her abdomen. Not painful exactly, but different. Wrong. She was in the nursery, straightening Sophia's blankets for the 10th time when it happened again, stronger this time, unmistakable. "Maria!" she called out, trying to keep the panic from her voice. The housekeeper appeared within seconds. "What is it?" I'm not sure, but I think something's starting." Another contraction, definite this time. "The baby. It might be the baby." Maria's efficiency was immediate and calming. "How far apart are the contractions?" "I don't know. Maybe 10 minutes? It just started." "Let me call Dr. Patel." "You sit down, breathe slowly, don't panic." She was already pulling out her phone. "And I'll try to reach Mr. DeLuca." But Adrian's phone went straight to voicemail. Again and again, each attempt met with the same automated message. He was somewhere dealing with Volkov, somewhere unreachable, while his daughter had apparently decided today was the day she'd make her entrance. Dr. Patel's nurse called back within minutes. "Dr. Patel says if the contractions are regular and getting closer together, you should head to the hospital. First babies often take a while, but it's better to be monitored." "My husband isn't here. He's dealing with a business emergency and I can't reach him." "Do you have someone who can drive you?" "Yes. Marco, our driver." "Then have him bring you in. We'll keep trying to reach your husband." The contractions intensified as Marco drove her through Manhattan traffic. Lillian tried calling Adrian again and again, each unanswered ring increasing her fear. Not just fear that he'd missed Sophia's birth, but fear that something had gone wrong, that Volkov had proven more dangerous than anticipated, that Adrian's promise to come home might be one he couldn't keep. "He'll make it," Marco said from the front seat, reading her anxiety in the rearview mirror. "Mr. DeLuca has never broken a promise to you. He won't start now." She wanted to believe him. But as another contraction gripped her, stronger than before, all she could think was that Sophia was coming and her father wasn't there. The hospital was a flurry of efficient activity. Nurses checked her vitals, confirmed she was in active labor, got her settled into a delivery room. Dr. Patel arrived shortly after, calm and reassuring. "You're about 4 centimeters dilated. We have time, but your daughter is definitely on her way." The doctor smiled. "Still no word from your husband?" "Nothing. His phone goes straight to voicemail. We'll keep trying. For now, let's focus on you and this baby." The hours blurred together in a haze of pain and breathing exercises, and nurses checking her progress. 5 centimeters, 6, 7. The contractions came harder and faster, each one a wave she had to ride through, each one bringing Sophia closer to the world. Around 7 that evening, when Lillian was deep in the agony of transition labor, the door burst open. Adrian stood there, disheveled in a way she'd never seen him. His suit was wrinkled, his tie gone, his hair wild like he'd been running his hands through it. Blood stained his knuckles. Not much, but enough to notice. "You're here," Lillian gasped between contractions. "You're actually here." "I'm so sorry. My phone got destroyed in the confrontation with Volkov. I came as soon as I could." He was beside her in an instant, taking her hand. "How far along are we?" 8 centimeters, the nurse answered. "She's doing beautifully, but it's intense." "What happened with Volkov?" Lillian managed to ask before another contraction hit. "Later. Right now, all that matters is you and Sophia." He pressed his lips to her forehead. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The next hour was the hardest of Lillian's life. The pain was beyond anything she'd imagined. Wave after wave of intensity that made her cry out despite every intention to stay quiet and controlled. Adrian stayed by her side through all of it, letting her squeeze his hand hard enough to bruise, whispering encouragement, being present in a way that felt more intimate than anything they'd shared in their entire marriage. "You're incredible," he kept saying. "So strong, so brave. You can do this." And somehow, with him there, she believed it. At 9:47 on a cold December evening, after one final exhausting push, Sophia Elena De Luca entered the world with a lusty cry that announced her displeasure at being evicted from her warm cocoon. "She's perfect," Dr. Patel announced, placing the squirming, crying baby on Lillian's chest. "Absolutely perfect." Lillian looked down at her daughter and felt her heart crack open in a way she hadn't known was possible. Sophia had a shock of dark hair, Adrian's aristocratic nose, and lungs that clearly worked magnificently. She was red-faced and angry, and absolutely the most beautiful thing Lillian had ever seen. "Hi, baby girl," she whispered through tears. "Hi, Sophia. We've been waiting for you." Adrian stood frozen beside the bed, staring at his daughter with an expression of such profound awe that he looked like a different person entirely. When Sophia's tiny hand wrapped around his finger, he broke completely, sobbing in a way Lillian had never witnessed. "She's real," he choked out. "She's actually real." "She's ours," Lillian said. "Your daughter." The nurses took Sophia to clean her up and do their measurements, while Dr. Patel attended to Lillian. 8 pounds, 3 ounces. 20 inches long. Perfect APGAR scores. A healthy, angry little girl who clearly had opinions about this whole being born situation. When they brought Sophia back, swaddled in a hospital blanket with a tiny pink hat covering her dark hair, the nurse placed her in Adrian's arms first. He held her like she was made of spun glass and lightning, simultaneously fragile and powerful. "Hi, Sophia," he whispered. "I'm your dad, and I promise, that I will spend every day of the rest of my life being worthy of you." Lillian watched father and daughter together and felt something settle in her chest. Whatever else Adrian had been, whatever darkness lived in his past, in this moment he was simply a man holding his child, overcome with love and terror and determination. "Tell me about Volkov," she said softly, not wanting to break the spell but needing to know. Adrian carefully settled into the chair beside her bed, Sophia still cradled against his chest. "I met with him and his uncle. Made it clear that while I respect their organization, I won't tolerate threats against my family or businesses. The uncle was reasonable. He wants peace. But Dmitri was young, arrogant, thought burning down a warehouse would prove something." "What did you do?" "I bought out their entire stake in my legitimate businesses, offered them 3 times what we'd agreed to, made it financially stupid for them to continue the conflict." He paused, and I made sure Dmitri understood That while I'm walking away from the life, I'm not defenseless. That threatening my family would end very badly for anyone stupid enough to try. The blood on your hands? Dmitri took a swing at me. I defended myself. His uncle was actually grateful, said I showed restraint when I could have done much worse. Adrian looked down at Sophia, who was beginning to settle into sleep. It's done, Lillian. The Bratva situation is completely resolved. They're out of our lives permanently. And the other operations? The remaining 40% you needed to divest? Finished. While you were in labor, I was finalizing the last transfers. As of today, every illegal operation is either shut down, sold, or no longer my responsibility. His voice was quiet, but certain. I'm out. Completely, permanently out. It's over. Lillian studied his face, looking for the lie, the hedge, the escape clause. But all she saw was exhaustion and relief, and a man holding his newborn daughter with hands that had just fought for the last time. It's really over? It's really over. The empire is dismantled. I'm just a businessman now, running legitimate operations, paying taxes, boring as hell. He managed a small smile. Well, boring except for this perfect creature who's about to make our lives beautifully chaotic. Sophia chose that moment to squirm and make a small sound of protest. Adrian immediately began rocking gently, instinctively soothing her. You're a natural, Lillian observed. I'm terrified. She's so small. What if I do everything wrong? Then we'll do it wrong together and figure it out as we go. She reached out to touch Sophia's tiny hand. That's what parents do. They make mistakes and learn and try again. They spent the night in the hospital room, taking turns holding Sophia, marveling at every tiny feature, counting fingers and toes, and trying to believe this miracle was real. Around 3 a.m, while Lillian dozed and Sophia slept in the hospital bassinet, Adrian pulled out his phone, a new one, since his had been destroyed, and called Castellano. It's done, he said quietly when the older man answered. My daughter was born tonight, and as of today I'm completely out of the life. Thought you should know. Congratulations, Adrian. On both counts. Castellano's voice was warm. Your mother would be so proud. You broke the cycle. You chose different. I had good motivation. The best motivation. Give that baby girl a kiss from an old man who's glad to see you made it out alive. After he hung up, Adrian stood at the window looking out at the city lights. Manhattan glittered below, the same city where his father had built an empire of fear, where Adrian had maintained that empire through calculation and carefully applied violence, where he'd met Lillian in a bookstore and fallen in love without realizing love would be the thing that finally set him free. What are you thinking about? Lillian asked from the bed. That tomorrow we get to take her home, that she'll grow up in that house, in those gardens my mother designed, and she'll never know what it cost to make her life peaceful. He turned to face her. And I'm thinking that I should sell the estate. Move us somewhere without those ghosts. Start completely fresh. Where would we go? Anywhere you want. The city, the suburbs, another state entirely. Sophia doesn't need that mansion. She just needs us. Lillian considered it. The estate had been a prison, then a negotiation space, then slowly a home. But Adrian was right. It was haunted by too much history. Too many bad memories. There's a house in Connecticut I saw online months ago, before the divorce attempt. It was smaller, quieter, had a garden, but nothing as elaborate. I used to look at it and dream about escaping there. Show me tomorrow, and I'll make an offer. We can be moved before Christmas. That fast? When you're motivated and have unlimited resources, things happen quickly. He returned to the bed, sitting beside her. I want Sophia's first memories to be clean. No armed guards, no security cameras, no shadows of my past. Just a family in a house with a garden where she can grow up normal and safe and loved. And what will you do if you're not running an empire? I've been thinking about that. The legitimate businesses are profitable but don't need my constant attention. I could actually have a life outside of work. He reached for her hand. I'd like to try being just a husband and father. See if I'm any good at it. You're already good at it. She squeezed his hand. You're here. You showed up. You kept your promises. That's what matters. The next morning, Dr. Patel cleared them to go home. Maria had sent Marco with a car seat already installed. baby clothes in Sophia's size, everything Lillian might need for the journey home. Lillian watched Adrian struggle with the car seat straps for 5 minutes, cursing quietly, before finally getting Sophia secured safely. "This is harder than negotiating with the Bratva," he muttered. "Welcome to parenthood, where car seats are your biggest enemy and sleep deprivation is your new reality." The drive back to the estate felt different with Sophia in the car. Every bump seemed too jarring. Every other driver seemed too reckless. The whole world suddenly felt more dangerous because now they had something infinitely precious to protect. When they arrived home, Maria had transformed the nursery into a perfect welcome space. Fresh flowers, soft lighting, everything ready for Sophia's arrival. She helped them get settled while Adrian disappeared to make phone calls. He returned an hour later with news. "I made an offer on the Connecticut house. Full asking price, cash, close in 2 weeks, and I've arranged for movers to start packing immediately. Anything you want to keep, mark it. Everything else gets donated or sold." 2 weeks? With a newborn? "Maria and her whole staff will handle the packing. We just need to tell them what to keep." He sat beside her on the nursery rocking chair. "I want us out of here, Lillian. Want to start over somewhere that isn't built on blood money and bad memories." She understood. The estate was beautiful, but it would always be tainted by what it represented. Sophia deserved better. The next 2 weeks were a blur of feeding schedules and diaper changes and trying to function on 3 hours of sleep. Sophia was a demanding baby, wanting to eat constantly, only settling when being held, making her opinions known through lung capacity that was truly impressive. Adrian threw himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he'd once applied to running his empire. He learned to change diapers with military precision, mastered the swaddle technique, could soothe Sophia's crying with a combination of rocking and humming Italian lullabies his mother had once sung to him. Lillian watched him transform from crime boss to exhausted, devoted father and felt her heart soften in ways she'd been protecting against for months. One night, around 2 in the morning, she found him in the nursery rocking a fussy Sophia and singing softly. "Stella, Stellina, la notte si avvicina." "Your mother's lullaby," Lillian said from the doorway. "It's the only thing that calms her down when she's like this." He continued rocking, continued singing. "I barely remember the words, but somehow they come back when I need them." She joined him, sitting in the other chair, watching her husband and daughter in the dim glow of the nightlight. "I've been thinking," Adrian said when the song ended and Sophia had finally settled into sleep, "about therapy. Dr. Mitchell asked me to do the grief work, to really process losing my mother. I've been avoiding it because it's painful and I'm not good with pain I can't fight or control. And now? Now I think I need to do it, for Sophia, so she doesn't grow up with a father who's carrying unprocessed trauma that leaks out in unhealthy ways." He looked at their daughter's peaceful face. "I want to be whole for her, or as close to whole as I can get. I'll support you through it. However hard it gets, however much it hurts, I'll be there. I know you will. You've been there through everything else." He carefully stood with Sophia, moving to place her in the crib. "I love you, Lillian. I don't say it enough, but I love you more than I knew it was possible to love another person. You saved me. This little girl saved me. You both pulled me out of darkness. I didn't even realize I was drowning in. I love you too." The words came easier now, felt more true than they had in years. Not the man you were pretending to be. The real you. The one who fights to be better, who keeps promises even when it's hard, who sings Italian lullabies at 2 in the morning. He crossed to her, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her remember why she'd fallen in love with him in the first place. The move to Connecticut happened on a cold December morning 2 weeks after Sophia's birth. The new house was everything Lillian had dreamed, smaller than the estate but still spacious, surrounded by trees instead of security fencing, with a garden that needed work but had potential. Most importantly, it had no history, no ghosts, no memories of empire and violence and the man Adrian used to be. They settled in quickly. Adrian worked from a home office, managing his legitimate businesses remotely. Lillian focused on Sophia and slowly rediscovered parts of herself she'd lost during the marriage. The woman who read for pleasure, who had opinions about things other than survival, who could breathe without constantly calculating risk. Their first Christmas in the new house was quiet and perfect. A small tree in the living room, Sophia in a ridiculous holiday outfit that Maria had sent, Chinese takeout because neither of them had energy to cook. "This is nice," Lillian said, curled on the couch with Sophia asleep on her chest. "Normal, boring, exactly what I wanted." Boring is underrated. Adrian sat beside her, one hand gently rubbing Sophia's back. "I spent 20 years chasing power and excitement. Turns out peace is better." They watched the tree lights twinkle in the darkness, their daughter breathing softly between them, and Lillian felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years. Contentment. Not happiness exactly. That would come and go, would be complicated by sleepless nights and postpartum challenges and the normal struggles of marriage and parenthood. But contentment. The deep satisfaction of being exactly where she needed to be, with exactly who she needed to be with. 6 months after Sophia's birth, Adrian had his breakthrough in therapy. He came home from his session with Dr. Mitchell looking wrung out and raw, his eyes red from crying. Lillian took one look at him and simply held out her arms. He collapsed into them, and for the first time since she'd known him, Adrian DeLuca truly grieved. For his mother, who died too young. For his childhood that was stolen. For the man he might have been if love hadn't been beaten out of him and replaced with survival instincts. He sobbed against her shoulder while Sophia napped upstairs, and Lillian held him through it, murmuring comfort, letting him break because breaking was necessary for healing. When the storm passed, he pulled back and looked at her with eyes that seemed clearer than before. "I've been carrying that for 30 years, he said hoarsely. Trying to outrun it, bury it, pretend it didn't matter. Dr. Mitchell made me stop running, made me face it, and it almost killed me, but I think I'm going to be okay now." "You're going to be better than okay." She wiped the tears from his face. "You're going to be free." That summer, they sat in their garden while Sophia played on a blanket in the grass, babbling at butterflies and reaching for flowers. The roses Adrian had planted were blooming, cuttings from his mother's garden at the estate, the only things he'd brought with him from that old life. "Do you ever regret it?" Lillian asked. "Walking away from all that power?" "Never. Not once." He watched Sophia discover her toes for the dozenth time, face scrunched in concentration. "I have everything that actually matters right here. And no part of you misses it? The control, the fear people had of you, the empire? Sometimes I miss feeling powerful. But then I remember that real power isn't making people fear you. It's making them feel safe." He pulled Lillian closer. "Sophia feels safe with me. You feel safe with me. That's more powerful than any empire I ever built." As summer turned to fall, they developed routines that felt like the life Lillian had always dreamed of. Morning walks with Sophia in her stroller, weekend trips to farmers' markets, quiet evenings reading while their daughter discovered the world one small wonder at a time. Adrian sold the last of his business holdings that had any connection to his old life. He donated massive amounts to charities supporting victims of organized crime, established a foundation in his mother's name that funded gardens in urban schools, and slowly rebuilt his reputation as someone who'd walked away from darkness and somehow found his way to light. On their 6th anniversary, the one they'd almost ended with divorce papers, they renewed their vows in the garden behind their Connecticut home. Just them, Sophia, Maria, who'd retired but came for the ceremony, and Dr. Mitchell, who'd helped them find their way back to each other. The vows were simple. No dramatic promises, no flowery language, just honest words about choosing each other, about continuing to choose each other, about building something good from the wreckage of what they'd been. "I promise to keep choosing you," Adrian said, holding both her hands. "Every day, every moment, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "I promise to keep demanding you be better," Lillian replied, "to never settle for less than you're capable of, to love the real you, not the version you think you should be." They kissed while Sophia clapped her hands and squealed with delight, not understanding the significance but sensing the joy. That night, after Sophia was asleep and they were alone in their bedroom, Adrian pulled out a box Lillian had never seen before. "I've been saving this for today," he said, handing it to her. Inside was a leather journal, well-worn, filled with his handwriting. "What is this?" "Everything I couldn't say. Every moment I almost lost you. Every fear, every hope, every promise I made to myself about being better." He sat beside her on the bed, I started writing it the day you told me you were pregnant. Thought maybe someday Sophia would want to know the truth about who her father was and who he became, but I want you to read it first. All of it. No more secrets. Lillian opened to the first page. The date was the day she'd announced her pregnancy in that boardroom. Today I became a father, the entry began, and I realized that everything I've built, everything I've done, every choice I've made for 20 years has led me to this moment where I have to choose between the empire and the only thing that actually matters. There's no choice. There was never really a choice. My daughter deserves better. Lillian deserves better. I deserve the chance to try to be better. She read late into the night while Adrian slept beside her, reading the chronicle of his transformation. The fear he'd hidden. The grief he had finally processed. The daily choice to be different. The moments when being different had cost him everything he used to value and given him everything he'd never known he needed. The final entry was from that morning before their vow renewal. 6 years ago, I married the woman I loved and slowly destroyed that love through control and fear and the belief that power was the only thing worth having. Today, I get to marry her again, knowing that love is the only real power. That vulnerability is strength. That the best version of myself is the one that chooses her and our daughter every single day. I'm not the man my father made me. I'm not the crime boss who built an empire on fear. I'm just Adrian, husband to Lillian, father to Sophia, man who gardens on weekends and sings lullabies at midnight, man who cries at children's books and would burn down the world to keep his family safe, but chooses not to because they deserve better than a father who burns things down. I don't know if I'll ever fully escape the shadows, but I know I'll spend the rest of my life walking toward light, and that's enough. It has to be enough. Lillian closed the journal with tears streaming down her face and turned to find Adrian awake, watching her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for trying, for changing, for becoming someone our daughter can be proud of. Thank you for demanding I be better, for not giving up on me even when I'd given up on myself." He pulled her close. "I love you. I'll love you forever. And I'll spend every day proving I deserve that love." They held each other in the darkness of their bedroom in their quiet Connecticut house, miles from the Manhattan Empire that no longer existed, years away from the people they used to be. And in the nursery down the hall, Sophia DeLuca slept peacefully, dreaming infant dreams, unaware that her very existence had rewritten her parents' story, unaware that she'd saved them both. Years later, when Sophia was old enough to ask questions, they would tell her an edited version of their story. They would explain that her father had made mistakes when he was younger but had chosen to change. That love was about transformation and second chances. That families were built through daily choices, not perfect beginnings. But for now, in this moment, on this anniversary that marked both endings and beginnings, Lillian and Adrian simply existed in the peace they'd fought so hard to create. The empire was gone. The darkness was past. The future was uncertain, but no longer terrifying. They'd survived the attempt at ending that almost destroyed them. They'd turned divorce papers into a family. They'd transformed a monster into a father, a prisoner into a partner, despair into hope. Not through magic or miracles, but through the hardest work either of them had ever done. The work of becoming people worthy of the love they'd found and nearly lost and somehow, against all odds, reclaimed. Outside, the roses bloomed in soil that had traveled from Sophia's grandmother's garden through an estate built on blood money to this small Connecticut yard where nothing violent had ever happened, and nothing violent ever would. Beauty growing from darkness, love emerging from fear, family built from the ashes of empire. Not a fairy tale ending, just a real one, complicated and imperfect and absolutely worth fighting for. One family, one choice, one day at a time, forever.